It looks like a normal family portrait. A mother, a father, and two children, perfectly still, perfectly posed. The year was 1911. The Holloways had gathered in their living room for what was supposed to be a simple keepsake, a moment of love frozen in time. The father stands behind a velvet chair, his wife seated gracefully with a gentle smile. The older son leans slightly forward, while the youngest daughter holds a doll with one porcelain eye missing. It's peaceful, almost too peaceful. But if you look closely, just behind them, you'll see it. A large mirror framed in dark oak, catching the entire scene. And that's where everything begins to fall apart. Because while the parents' and son's reflections are there, the little girl isn't. She's visible in the photo, but missing completely from the mirror. Photographers call it a light anomaly. Historians call it an optical illusion. But those who've studied this photo for over a century say something different. They say the camera didn't malfunction that day. It captured something that wasn't supposed to be seen, and when you hear what happened to the Holloway family after this photo was taken, you'll understand why the mirror wasn't empty. It was waiting. The screen fades to black. A faint crackle echoes, like an old record struggling to breathe. Then comes the voice, low, calm, unsettling. You're watching Truth Uncaged, where the past doesn't rest, it waits. The image of the 1911 family flickers back onto the screen, but this time something feels different. The light in the photo seems colder, the shadows deeper, and the girl, the one holding the doll, almost looks as if she's moved. What you're seeing, the narrator continues, is one of the most debated photographs ever taken. A family portrait that broke every rule of light, shadow, and sanity. The voice lowers, almost to a whisper. Take a closer look at the mirror behind them. You can see the father, the mother, the boy. But where is the little girl? A beat of silence follows, long enough for unease to crawl under your skin. Some say it was an exposure error. Others believe the reflection didn't appear because there was nothing left to reflect. The screen pulses faintly, a heartbeat sound beneath static. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Do you see a trick of light? Or something darker staring back? The hum of static deepens, then cuts sharply. Only the voice remains, colder now. To understand this photograph, we have to go back to where it was taken. A house that no longer exists, in a town that never forgot what happened inside. The camera pans slowly into the photo, zooming toward the mirror, until everything fades into darkness. Let's go back to Millfield, 1911, Millfield, Pennsylvania. A mining town buried under snow and silence. In 1911, it was a place where time moved slower and secrets stayed frozen beneath the coal dust. The Holloway family wasn't the only one living there, but they were the ones people whispered about the most. Their home sat on the edge of town, half hidden behind leafless trees and a black iron gate that never opened. Inside that home lived Thomas and Eliza Warren, and their two children, Henry, aged 9, and Clara, 6. Thomas worked at the mine. Eliza gave piano lessons to the pastor's wife. They were quiet, polite, forgettable even, until the winter of that year, when the portrait was taken. The story goes that Thomas wanted a family photograph before Christmas, a rare luxury in a mining town, a chance to preserve a moment before another year of danger and decay. So he hired a traveling photographer, a man named Arthur Blake, whose work was known for its eerie precision. Arthur arrived on December 4th, 1911. He set up his wooden tripod in the Warren living room, a narrow space, with one oil lamp and a mirror hanging above the mantel. He adjusted the light, told them not to move, and when the shutter clicked, a sound like the snap of brittle bone, something in the room changed. Eliza blinked. The lamp flickered, and Arthur swore for just a second the reflection in the mirror didn't match what stood before it. He packed his equipment quickly, refusing tea, refusing conversation. When Thomas asked if something was wrong, Arthur just muttered, "Some faces shouldn't stay still too long." That photograph was developed 3 days later, and when the Warrens saw it, their lives and the town's began to unravel. Because in the mirror behind them, there were only 3 reflections. The little girl, Clara, wasn't there, but her hand was, pressed against the glass from the inside. Arthur Blake had seen strange things before. He'd photographed miners whose faces were blackened by soot and grief, and widows who smiled faintly beside coffins draped in lace. But nothing had ever unsettled him quite like the Warrens' portrait. The three faces looked calm, ordinary. Thomas stern and proud, Eliza pale but poised, Henry clutching his toy soldier, and then the space where Clara should have been. In the photograph, she stood beside her mother, hands folded neatly at her waist. But in the mirror's reflection, her place was empty, replaced instead by a faint handprint as if someone had pressed from within the glass. Arthur didn't sleep that night. He locked the photo inside his case, but even then he swore he heard the faint sound of fingernails dragging across the glass plate. He left Millfield before dawn, telling no one what he'd captured. Back at his studio 2 towns over, he developed a second copy, just to be sure. This time, something new appeared. In the reflection behind the empty spot, a shadow, small, human-shaped, was crouched near the fireplace. Eyes too bright, too aware, Arthur tried to destroy the negative, but the emulsion wouldn't burn. The image stayed whole, the girl's missing reflection seeming to shift each time he looked at it. A week later, he sent a sealed letter to Thomas Warren. No greeting, no closing, and just one line: "Do not keep the mirror." The Warrens ignored the warning. They hung the photo proudly above their mantel, the same place the mirror once rested. And from that night on, neighbors said they could hear tapping sounds through the thin winter air, steady, rhythmic, like small fingers on glass. Inside the Warren home, the mirror was gone. But whatever had once lived inside it hadn't left. It was the coldest night of that winter. Snow fell in sheets, muting every sound in Millfield except the slow groan of wind through the trees. Inside the Warren home, the fire had long burned out. Only the dim glow of the photograph above the mantel lit the room, faintly, unnaturally, as if the image itself breathed. Thomas had been restless for days. He said he heard whispers when he walked past the photo. Not voices exactly, but something like breath moving behind the glass. Eliza thought it was exhaustion, until she heard it too, a slow, rhythmic tapping from somewhere inside the frame. That night, Henry woke up screaming. He said Clara was standing in his room, not beside his bed, not at the door, but behind the mirror. He said she wanted to come out. Thomas stormed into the living room, convinced it was nothing more than a child's nightmare. But when he looked at the photograph, his face was drained of color. Clara's figure had shifted, just slightly, closer to the edge of the image. Her head tilted toward him, her smile was faintly wider than before. He tore the frame off the wall and smashed it on the floor. The glass cracked in a perfect circle, like something had pressed outward from the inside. Eliza gasped as a single shard slid across the floor and stopped at her feet, streaked with tiny fingerprints. That was the last night the family was ever seen together. By morning, the Warren house was silent, the fire unlit, the doors half open. When the neighbors entered, the photograph lay in the ashes of the fireplace, untouched by flame. Thomas and Eliza were gone. Henry sat near the window, staring into the snow, murmuring the same word again and again. "She's in the glass." And on the wall above the empty mantel, where the photograph had once hung, a mirror was waiting, unbroken, and inside it, a small handprint that didn't fade. Weeks passed before the sheriff dared to enter the Warren home again. By then, the snow had buried the path, and the windows had frosted over so thickly it was like the house was trying to hide itself. When they finally stepped inside, the air was wrong, still heavy, and cold in a way that didn't belong to the weather. On the mantel lay the photograph, edges burned but the image untouched, as though fire had refused to touch it. The faces of the family remained frozen, but something had changed. The father's eyes now looked directly at the viewer. The mother's faint smile was gone, and the space where Clara once stood was empty, gone completely. In her place, faintly visible in the background, was a reflection, not of the girl, but of someone standing behind the photographer. A shadowy figure, blurred, just tall enough to be an adult. No one could explain it. The original glass negative was missing. The chemicals Arthur Blake had used had been poured down the drain. But the image, that impossible image, had survived every attempt to destroy it. The sheriff ordered the house sealed, but the story spread. Local papers called it the Mirror Girl mystery. Some claimed it was a hoax. Others swore they'd seen a girl's face peering from the windows of the abandoned Warren home. Months later, when Arthur Blake was finally found, his studio had been abandoned. Dozens of photographs hung on the walls, faces of strangers with faint distortions. But one image was different. Pinned to his desk was the Warren family portrait. Except this version showed 5 figures. 4 were familiar: Thomas, Eliza, Henry, and Clara. The 5th stood in the background, partially hidden, watching them all, and beneath it, scrawled in ink, she was never theirs to begin with. The authorities called it nonsense, but the photo was taken into evidence, and then quietly misplaced, lost somewhere in the archives of Millfield County, or so they claimed. Because decades later, someone found it again. For almost 70 years, the Warren family photo was nothing more than a whispered legend, a story told by locals to scare travelers passing through the ruins of Millfield, the town that had slowly died after the mines collapsed in 1913. The house was gone. The people were gone. But the mirror, some said it still stood, half buried in snow and ash, waiting for someone foolish enough to look into it. Then in 1982, the photograph resurfaced. A graduate student from Boston University named Rebecca Lane was researching unsolved American folklore. She stumbled across a sealed box labeled Millfield Estate, evidence 1911, in the archives of a courthouse being shut down. Inside the box was a stack of brittle papers and a single photograph wrapped in cloth. Rebecca didn't know what she was holding at first, but when she peeled the fabric back, she froze. The image was too clear to be real, the kind of sharpness no camera from that era should have captured. And yet there it was, the Warren family staring out across time. The same mirror behind them, the same frozen smiles, except this version was different. The girl, Clara, was visible, but her eyes, those lifeless gray eyes, looked directly at the viewer. And reflected within them, you could see something moving, a faint figure, twisted and unrecognizable, standing behind whoever took the picture. Rebecca became obsessed. She scanned the photo, enlarged it, studied it pixel by pixel. But each time she zoomed in, the shadows inside the mirror seemed to change shape. Sometimes it looked like a hand reaching out. Sometimes a face pressed against glass. She began keeping the photo covered when she slept. But still, she said she could hear tapping sounds from her desk drawer. 3 slow knocks, pause, then 3 more. 2 months later, Rebecca vanished. Her apartment was found empty except for her notes, and the photograph lying on the floor beneath the mirror in her hallway. There was one new detail no one could explain. When police picked it up, they found a faint, child-sized handprint on the inside of the glass frame. When news of Rebecca Lane's disappearance reached the papers, the photo was seized by investigators and sealed again under evidence tag Yarem 4711. No one was allowed to view it for years, but things like this never really stay buried. In 2003, a private collector from Chicago named Edwin Caro purchased a lot of abandoned artifacts from the same courthouse auction. Among them was the Warren photograph. He didn't know it at first, not until he hung it in his study and noticed something strange. At night, the photo would appear darker, not from the lights but from within. The mirror in the background of the picture, once dull and gray, began to shimmer faintly, like liquid glass. And the girl, Clara, seemed to shift her posture ever so slightly each week. Her head tilted closer to the frame's edge, her reflection still missing. Edwin thought it was his mind playing tricks. Until one night, while reviewing old home videos, he saw something impossible. In the footage of his study, filmed days earlier, the photo appeared clear for just a second. And there, standing behind him in the reflection, was a small figure. He froze the frame. Zoomed in, it wasn't Clara, it was someone older, someone with hollow eyes and a faint smile that mirrored his own. A week later, Edwin called a historian friend to take the photo away. When she arrived, the frame was shattered. The photograph lay face down, glass splintered around it, but inside, pressed into the backing paper, was a set of small fingerprints, identical to those described in the 1911 police report. The historian swore the air felt colder near the shards, and when she turned the picture over, Clara's reflection had returned. But this time there were two girls in the mirror, one facing forward, one turned toward the glass as if whispering to something on the other side. That night, Edwin's security cameras recorded something chilling. At exactly 3:11 a.m., the photograph fell from the wall. The glass didn't break, but in that brief moment before it hit the floor, a reflection appeared. A pale hand pressing outward from inside the frame. The timestamp froze. The video ended, and when police retrieved the footage later that week, Edwin Caro's reflection wasn't there. For years, the photo remained nothing more than a family relic, a silent witness from 1911, smiling faintly through decades of dust and time. But one night, Evelyn decided to do something she'd never done before. She scanned the photograph into her computer, enhancing it with modern AI tools, sharpening the shadows, balancing the light. What appeared on her screen made her blood run cold. In the enhanced version, the reflections in the mirror behind the family were suddenly more visible. The mother had a reflection. The two daughters had reflections. The family dog's eyes glimmered faintly in the mirror. But the father, the man seated in the center, had none, no reflection, no shadow behind him, just a dark, formless void, as though the mirror refused to acknowledge his existence. Evelyn's heart pounded as she zoomed closer. The father's eyes, once gentle and proud, now looked hollow, almost lifeless. His faint smile seemed to twist at the edges, as if mocking her discovery. Then she noticed something even more disturbing. In the enhanced image, the father's hand, resting on his wife's shoulder, wasn't touching her at all. There was a faint, almost imperceptible gap. His fingers hovered just above her skin. It was as if he wasn't really there. Evelyn sat frozen, unable to look away. For the first time, she realized the awful truth. This wasn't a photo of a happy family. It was a portrait of the living and the dead, captured together in one chilling moment, and the missing reflection was never a mistake. It was a message, a warning. The man in the photo had died before it was ever taken. Shaking, Evelyn searched through the old family archives in the attic, desperate to understand who the man really was. After hours of digging through yellowed letters and brittle pages, she found a folded newspaper clipping dated January 5th, 1911, just weeks before the photo was taken. The headline sent chills down her spine. Local father found dead in barn. Family claims he still watches over them. The article described a tragic story. The father, Thomas Hargreaves, had taken his own life after falling into debt and despair. His wife, Margaret, reportedly refused to believe he was gone. She even insisted to the town photographer that they would take their annual portrait together, all four of us, just like always. But that was impossible. Thomas had already been buried, yet when the photograph was developed, there he was, sitting calmly among them. The photographer, horrified, swore he never saw the man during the session. The mother smiled through tears, saying, "He promised he'd never leave us." Evelyn dropped the clipping, her hands trembling. The truth was undeniable now. Her great-grandfather had returned from beyond the grave, just to keep that promise. But as she looked one last time at the photograph, she noticed something that hadn't been there before. A faint handprint, pressed from the inside of the glass frame, and beneath it, freshly written in fog, were the words, "I never left." The lights in the room flickered. The reflection in the glass blinked, and Evelyn finally understood. Some promises should never be kept.